everybody, and welcome to this session on urban eats, cities tackling food resilience. It's a very important topic and very timely as well. As you know, or some of you may know, that this is an initiative, a joint initiative between the Cities Resilience Program and the World Bank's Urban Resilience and Land program of the global program of the World Bank. Now, before we begin and we get into the details, let me just inform you about the ground rules. That I would like to remind you that the intention of this speaker series is to have a conversation. And the purpose of these global seminars is to have an open and honest learning conversation. So the calls are not on the record. They are not on the record, and we ask you not to attribute any comments unless you have the speakers express permission. And if you need the permission, please let us know and we'll help you get it. Today we have about 200 participants, registered participants for this session. So to facilitate the discussion, we ask that you write your questions with the help of the WebEx Q&A, the chat function, and the Q&A function up there. And please note that the recording of this session, as well as the PowerPoint presentations, will be posted online by next week or so. So now I'll request Lynette, my co-host, to take over. Lynette.
Great, thanks very much, Baja, and great to be here as well as the host. My name is Lynette, and I'm the Global Director of Communications at the Resilient Cities Network. I'm going to start off today with a short introduction to the Urban Eats campaign, which is the starting point for why we are hosting this session here. I will then introduce our speakers for the session, and then of course we can begin the presentations. So my team and I at the Resilient Cities Network run the Urban Eats campaign, which was launched in July this year in response to rising food prices and food insecurity as a result of shocks and stresses such as the war in Ukraine, the climate crisis, and the knock-on effects of the pandemic. Now, food insecurity has indeed made headlines throughout this year, impacting at least 150 million urban residents globally. Now, while cities worry about food security and food prices, we know that they also generate 2.8 billion tons of organic waste each year, and much of that is food. As such, as cities think about how they will manage the challenge of food insecurity for their vulnerable communities, the Urban Eats campaign calls for them to also use the opportunity to tackle the food waste issue, pivoting towards more resilient and regenerative food systems. By advancing circular practices in their waste systems, they can increase their capacity to provide food security for their residents, while of course simultaneously unlocking some key dividends, such as reducing their greenhouse gas emissions and providing new economic opportunities. And we will hear more about this from our speakers today. At the end of the day, the campaign really seeks to inspire cities to take action. But we know that cities don't always have control over their city's food systems, as these can oftentimes be managed by state or national governments. So within the campaign, we want to be able to showcase diverse entry points that cities have used to improve food circularity in their food systems. These inspirational examples, which we've collected from various cities and also with our partners such as Arup, who are here with us today as well, will hopefully inspire other cities to do the same. And if you haven't already, please visit our campaign website at the resilientcitiesnetwork.org. So that was my very brief introduction to the Urban Eats campaign. And without further ado, I'd like to start introducing our speakers for today's session. First up, we have Iker Sinlinger, Global Leader for Food and Agriculture Systems at Arup, where he supports the just transition to resilient and equitable food systems that provide healthy food for everyone and supports the biosphere of a thriving planet. We're excited to be hearing from him as he has experience in leading complex, high-profile, interdisciplinary projects. He advocates for new approaches to food production through innovation, collaboration, and creativity, encompassing the spectrum from regenerative processes to advanced technologies. In his role, Iker advises public and private sector clients on topics ranging from strategy to delivery and implementation at national, regional, and city scale. Next, we have Jose Antonio Vázquez Acevedo, the State Coordinator of the Zero Hunger Nuevo Leon strategy in the Secretariat of Equality and Inclusion in Mexico. He has rich experience in academia and policies, most notably designing, implementing, and evaluating social programs that address poverty in the state of Nuevo Leon, Mexico. Finally, we have Mark Scott, who manages critical infrastructure programs and initiatives for the District of Columbia's Homeland Security and Emergency Management Agency. Mark's career spans an impressive 40 years in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. For the District of Columbia, Mark leads a program to strengthen protection and resilience of critical infrastructure in the U.S. Capitol against all hazards. As part of that program, he's currently managing 3 analytical projects focusing on supply chain resilience for food and water, fuel, and healthcare. We're excited to be hearing about that shortly. Thank you very much for listening. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Iker, to kick off the presentations. Thank you.
And I'm going to do the screen share, so bear with me. You hopefully going to see this now, what I wanted to show you, and I need to get my own screen ready. And here we go. So I want to, being part of this Urban Eats campaign that Lynette kindly referred to, I want to talk to you a little bit about why do we actually need to look at food resilience? Why at cities, or why now? So first off, really, why do we need to strengthen the resilience of the urban food system? My first point is, I know we're talking about net zero carbon and transitioning out of it. Well, guess what? We can't do that with food. So it's essential, and we need a reliable and resilient supply. And 70% of all food is actually consumed in cities, but 80% of it's grown in rural areas. So really the question is, how do they relate? Because the food that ends up in the cities is digested quite often by us humans, or wasted, and then how does it get back to the countryside in terms of in ways of nutrients? Now, what we do at the moment is we manage this nutrient cycle by just digging up stuff from the ground and putting it on the fields. And that really means we make food a non-renewable resource. So in my view, it means that food is neither circular, and thus by definition, it's not resilient. Another bit we do is we created this incredibly complex and long supply chains, shipping the food all around the world to bridge this gap between the rural and the urban. And that makes it, of course, the longer a supply chain is and the more complex, the more vulnerable it is for disruption. But also, it means there's a lot of food going to waste. So this is 1/3 of all food goes to waste. If food waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest by greenhouse gas emissions, because food waste usually is a big source of greenhouse gas emissions. And already Lynette mentioned the 2.8 billion tons of organic waste each year in cities, a lot of which is coming from food. And then there is another thing. Of the food that gets through, the urban infrastructure is vulnerable. And it's a complex urban system that can't always cope with the stresses, whether that's flooding, whether that's energy shortages. And each of these can have a devastating effect on people sort of getting their food. Now, the question really is, why do we do this now? Now, the obvious thing is the shocks we've seen this year, I think in particular, and they come thick and fast, have really exposed the vulnerability of our food system. So we've seen climate change. There was huge flooding the year before. This year we had lots of drought, record heat wave. We also had COVID for a few years. That really shown us that how vulnerable these complex supply chains are. And then we had the war in Ukraine, which then again wreaked havoc at the kind of energy market, but also at the grain market and all the points that sort of Lynette mentioned. And moving forward, food has really become inaccessible. So there's already the 150 million people living in cities and towns which are food insecure, and now the price is going through the roof. And the price rise is really driven both by energy and by many things, but it shows how interlinked really the food system is with the energy and the fertilizer market, where prices have gone up 300%. Now, the other thing is food is increasingly recognized as a big issue because we can't transition out of it. And so, at COP, it was shown, and it was really getting the stage it needed. And in my book, there's also good news here, because addressing food resilience and circularity can go hand in hand. And this is actually the reason why we at Arab, as an engineer firm, teamed up with our cities to develop the Urban Eats report and began this campaign to address this big problem. So what are the challenges for cities? I say challenges, but I also say these are the solutions. For one, we need to localize production and really start taking a more bioregional approach. For me, that's the foundation to create these closed loop systems, that the nutrients can cycle back, but also to make it more resilient. One of my colleagues runs a pizza company in Baltimore, and the only ingredient during the pandemic they had problems with was the flour, which they couldn't source within 50 miles. Everything else was fine. So localized systems can be more resilient and can provide that kind of level of security and circularity. The second one I want to pick out here is linking surplus to need. So there's so much food wasted in cities, and it's not really reaching the people that need it most. Urban food systems are quite often inequitable. And here are opportunities for cities to take a hand and organize that redistribution, like Food Forward in South Africa does. The next one is really creating value from waste. And by that, I think we also need to change the mindset. At the moment, some places do composting or kind of organic waste treatment, but it's a waste management method. And what it should really become is a nutrient creation method or a kind of fertilizer production method. And then the focus slightly shifts. And that's a way, I think, if we can start valorize what's seen as waste and as a problem and make it an essential ingredient of the food system, we can move this forward. And I would even expand this further. This is what I do with my infrastructure colleagues here at Arab. It's radically rethinking urban infrastructure. So trying to work out how we can make food an integral part of it. So we're not only planning for energy and water and transport and those things, but we plan for food. And I include in this, the big challenge for cities is the wastewater system, because this is the ultimate nutrients. The slide I had earlier was a phosphate mine. And there's a lot of phosphate in human urine, but we just wasted and have to treat it. So it's a big problem. And last but not least, it's important to strengthen the links between stakeholders of the kind of city's food system. And here I think we should use the superpower of food, and that is it can actually bring people together, and it can do so beyond city boundaries. And I think this is where we connect consumer and grower much better. And that can help shape behaviors, reduce waste, create more resilience, and create just better outcomes for everyone. With that, I hand over back to Lynette.
Thanks very much. Sorry, go ahead, Baja.
Oh, go ahead, Lynette. Okay. I'm sorry, we've had, our next speaker was supposed to be Jose Antonio, but I don't think he's been able to join us. So we'll keep trying, but thank you very much for this excellent presentation, Mareike. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions and to probe and to find and to learn from your experience. With that, let me hand it over to Mark for his presentation. Mark?
Thank you, and good day to everybody. Really appreciate being here. I think somebody's going to be working my slides for me. So while we do that, just a little bit of background. I work for a large city emergency management agency, and so everything that you're going to be hearing from me is sort of provided through that lens. This is actually pre-pandemic. We started taking a look at what we identified as essential commodities for our city, how those come to us, where they come from, how they get there, where people go to get them. And we started out by focusing particularly on food, because as Ike said, food is an essential. We know that we looked at past large-scale disasters that have happened around the world, including in the United States. And we know that large catastrophes like that can have devastating effects on our ability to get the things we need for daily life and for survival. So we wanted to understand what this looked like, and we started out looking at the food system. And so I'm going to give you some thoughts that have sort of come to us from that effort. Recognizing again that you're going to be hearing this through the lens of an emergency manager, my agency tends to think day to day about how you can respond and recover from when bad things happen. This is a little bit of a departure for agencies like mine and for my profession, because really what we're trying to do is we're trying to look ahead and seeing what sort of things can happen, but then looking not just at individual assets or facilities, but we're really looking at whole systems and networks. I'm trying to understand how they work, how they can be disrupted, and what we need to be doing to help minimize that disruption. In other words, how we can make those resilient. So I'm going to go ahead and share a few thoughts with you here. If you could go to the next slide. Just for reference, I know many of you know Washington, D.C. We're that little sort of inverted square in the middle of this larger urban area. Washington, D.C., as you probably know, is a very highly dense area. We're about 68 square miles. We don't really make much of anything in Washington, D.C. Everything that we require is imported from somewhere else. We are surrounded by a number of large counties in the state of Virginia and the state of Maryland. And what that makes up is the complex we call the National Capital Region. And that's going to be important as I go through this, because pretty much everything that we do in terms of food system resilience has to look not only at this region, but really what's happening outside the region. So could you go to the next slide? So as we've been doing this work, and we really focused a lot again on how we get food into the district, number of challenges that presented ourselves, some of which you heard earlier in that presentation from Mikey. One is that we realized that we have a very extensive food supply chain. As Mikey pointed out, those are long, those are complex. They extend far out beyond even the National Capital Region. And so we know that what can happen somewhere else that's really outside of our area of responsibility could impact our ability to get food here. In some cases, as we've tried to map where that food comes from, we get food from all around the United States that travels great distances to get here. So we know that there's a lot of opportunities for disruption. We also know that in a large urban area like ours, there are a lot of different places that people go to get food. I think there was a bias when we first started this work that people assumed, well, everybody goes to the grocery store to get their food. And to a certain extent, that's right. We have a large percentage of our population, we believe, that relies on those large commercial grocery stores for food. But as we looked into it more, we came to understand even more clearly that people also rely on a lot of other sources. We have a very extensive institutional setting where people in universities and hospitals and long-term care facilities and even correctional facilities, where people are lodged for extended periods of time, they need to be fed. And so that's a source of food that's not necessarily going to the grocery store. We also know that there are a lot of areas in our city, and this is true in all urban areas, where people don't necessarily go to a major food store. They go to what we call a convenience store, or a little place that maybe just sells packaged foods, and that's the source of a lot of their daily calories. We know a lot of people go to restaurants for most of their food. And we know that there are a lot of people that don't have the resources and really rely on government assistance programs, and private and nonprofit feeding organizations for their daily food. So when we think about the food system and we think about how we make that resilient, we really have to look at all those different sources. And that frankly was a little bit of an eye opener for us. We know that there are multiple partners that we need to work with too. You mentioned the importance of bringing stakeholders together. When we look at our food system, we know that includes stakeholders in the private sector side, those that own and operate those supply chains. We know it's those nonprofit organizations that really fill a big gap for a lot of folks in terms of being able to get food. We know it's the federal government, where in a large catastrophe, they would have a response and recovery role that would help make sure that people can get food. And so there are a lot of folks that really need to be brought to that table, if you will. And that means that we have to be doing more than just doing what we typically do, which is, we organize, we facilitate emergency response. Now that means that we have to do a lot of upfront work with a lot of those stakeholders and plan and prepare for disruptions. And then I mentioned food insecurity. We know that even though Washington, D.C. and the National Capital Region in the U.S. is a pretty prosperous area, that like every place, we have pockets of our community where people don't have resources, where people don't have access to grocery stores, that don't have access to healthy food. And so in all of the planning that we're doing, we need to make sure that we're building equity into all of our food planning efforts. So those are just a number of the resilience issues that we're facing as we're going through this work. If you go to the next slide, I want to show you just an example of how we've started to try to understand what those supply chains look like. We figured if we were going to be thinking about how to make our food system more resilient, we have to start out with understanding what that system looks like. And a big part of that is mapping out what those supply chains are. So this map you're looking at right now is an example of how we tried to understand, just for the commercial grocery industry, where a lot of our food comes from. And so what we did was we identified the top 10 grocery stores that serve the National Capital Region. As best we could, we identified where their local distribution centers are, where food comes from multiple suppliers, it's stored there, and then it's actually delivered into the city. And then we wanted to look at what the freight network looked like that actually brought food from those distribution centers to the city. So we did that, we mapped that out. What this showed us was, not surprisingly, we are reliant on a lot of areas that are way outside our area of responsibility. And so we need to understand what is going on in those areas, what's being done to make sure their operations are resilient so this whole system can work. We also were able to take some annual revenue data from those stores and make some judgments about the relative importance of those freight networks. So we could tell which roads that came into the National Capital Region were the most important for bringing food into the district. So when a major event happens, like a large snowstorm or anything else like that, that could disrupt that transportation, we can tell in advance what's going to be most likely affected and make sure that information gets out to our emergency managers. Can you go to the next slide? So given kind of what we're trying to get done and what we've seen, and recognizing that there are a number of different things that can disrupt our supply chains, not just climate change impacts that we know are occurring and are going to occur with more frequency, future public health emergencies, even geopolitical conflicts like we're seeing right now. We also know that there's a number of other disruptors too. In this country, we are sort of teetering on the brink of a potential freight rail strike, which would have devastating effects across our food supply chain. So understanding how factors like labor unrest, how cyber attacks, focusing on some of these major actors can really disrupt our ability to get food is also something we're taking into account. But again, one of our initial forays into this is to say, let's map those supply chains. Let's see what they look like. And so we've developed a number of maps like the one you just saw in the previous slide, because that gives us a better sense of where there are vulnerabilities in that system, and where there are potential choke points, and where we can use that information to try to build resilience into the system up front. Another initiative we have going on right now with food is that we're working with all of our jurisdictions in the National Capital Region to understand what is it that we would need to do if there is a major catastrophic event that occurs here. The most recent one we've had, of course, is the pandemic, but we know with climate change projections that we're likely going to be facing larger natural hazards and natural disasters that are really going to disrupt our ability, not only in the National Capital Region, but even on the whole East Coast, to be able to get food. So how can we better prepare for that? And so we're working with a lot of our emergency management community in the region to understand how they currently plan for those, and where some of the gaps are and how we can sort of fill those gaps. We mentioned, Ike mentioned earlier about growing the local food economy, and that for us is also a big deal, because the District of Columbia has virtually no agricultural land other than maybe a few small urban farms, and we're increasingly looking at growing food on rooftops of buildings. But we rely a lot on some of the agricultural areas in surrounding counties. And so there's a very robust effort right now regionally to try to grow that food economy, because we know that one of the best ways we can build resilience into the system is to shorten that distance between where the food comes from and where it needs to get to. Addressing food waste is I'll say, is a work in progress. There are a number of composting initiatives already in place, privately organized, and a lot of those are with the restaurant industry and the grocery industry. But I think there's more that we can be doing on that, and more that we can make that more of an institutional effort to reduce food waste, because we know, based on all the studies we've done and everything we've seen elsewhere, that this is not only an environmental problem, but it's a missed opportunity. And then finally, we look at how we can make investment opportunities to build more resilience into that system. A lot of that means strengthening our infrastructure, making sure that the roads and bridges and things that we rely on for that food to come in by truck are strong. They can withstand disruption. They can avoid some of the infrastructure problems that we've seen in other parts of our country, particularly with bridges. So understanding how we can do that. Also looking at where we can make investments in increased cold storage facilities around the city, or central kitchen processing facilities where schools and other organizations can come together and prepare food and get it out to people that really need it. So there are a lot of ways that we can do that, and a lot of places where we think by making strategic investments in that system, we can improve its resilience. So that was intended to be just a flavor of kind of the things that are happening in our region. There's a whole lot more I could talk about. I'd be happy to get into this during the Q&A session, but if you go to the last slide, my contact information is up here. I would love to talk to any of you offline if you have any questions about this, because we're really excited about what we're doing, and we think that it's going to be making a big difference for our region, and hopefully be a model for other parts of the country and even parts of the world. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Mark, for that presentation. Our third speaker, Jose Antonio, has now joined us, so I will hand the floor over to him. Jose Antonio?
Okay, thank you. Good morning to everyone. It is a pleasure for me to be with you. Today I would like to talk about we have built in Zero Hunger strategy located at Nuevo León, Mexico. Zero Hunger Nuevo León is a multi-sectorial, interinstitutional, transversal, and sustainable strategy in which the social, public, private, and academic sectors participate. The strategy is aligned to the development state plan, to the strategic plan for 2030, and to the 2030 ONU agenda. The strategy has its origins in 2016, when we became acquainted to the international experiences of the Forum Strategies to Eradicate Poverty. Zero Hunger was being designed and was operated in the private sector, along with Food Bank of Caritas de Monterrey, the State Board, universities, and organizations of the civil society. The road has been built with challenges and wise choices, but always with a common objective among the ones that participate. In 2017, the law for the right to correct feeding and the battle against food waste was published, which gave us the legal frame as the first step towards the reduction of food waste, allowing us to have a first food processing plan, as well as having the Congress declare the month of October as the month of Zero Hunger in Nuevo León. The first edition of the Social Innovation Prize in 2019, along with the universities, and the inauguration of the second processing plant in Galeana in 2022, to strengthening the strategy, last May the 4th, an agreement of the operation basis for the Zero Hunger strategy in Nuevo León was formalized and signed under the social policy Nueva Ruta, a more ample effort of the government of the state of Nuevo León. The Nueva Ruta, to include to be equal, is a social, transversal, and coordinated policy to reduce scarcity and improve the life conditions of people, building a sustainable equality that the state requires to guarantee a sustainable development. This new route is formed by a net of 5 paths and contemplate 5 aligned paths to the multidimensional measurement of poverty, the education, health, and social security, housing, income, and feeding paths. In each one of the paths, all the sectors of society to attend to the foreseen needs are articulated from a holistic and integral focus. Another great advance in the vision and application of the social policies that the strategy Zero Hunger Nuevo León is integrated in the feeding path, in which we have to determine to eradicate the extreme food poverty and food waste, aspiring to be the first state in taking care of the hunger problem in 2030, and to establish a culture of no wasting, of food wasting. The challenge is big. In Nuevo León, 430,000 people cannot afford the basic food basket. This means that even using all of their income, they are not able to acquire the food needed to survive. In other words, 500,000 kids, adolescents, and adults cannot consume the minimum level of calories and nutrients because they don't have the minimum monthly income to afford the basic food basket established by Coneval, and only the 54% is in a productive age range to have the option to generate income that allows to overcome this condition. In this matter, our goals are clear. We seek to look after the 400,000 Neoleoneses that cannot afford the basic food basket, reduce the lost food and food waste in the state, and to achieve the self-sufficiency of the 54% in the productive age range. To achieve this, we designed an integral model sustained by 3 pillars. Let me show you this. The first pillar is the reduction of lost and food waste, centering its recovery. The health and feeding orientation aiming to contribute to the feeding security and to improve the nutritious state of people. The feeding self-sufficiency for the generation of conditions and capacities that allows to break the malnutrition circle in a sustainable way. These pillars are conjugated through 4 transversal axes: social innovation, communication, normativity, and evaluation. These actions are not isolated philanthropic efforts. They are based in statistic autocorrelation methods that identify territorial units with population in poverty conditions in the rural and urban fields through spatial concentrations to localize the priority assistance for the state of Nuevo León. In the achievement of our goals, a fundamental element is the institutionalization of the former government board as civil mechanism, now called interinstitutional committee. And let me show you this. This committee is a collegiate organ integrated by the public, private, academic, and social sectors committed to the cause, in which the secretariats of equality and inclusion, health, education, regional and agricultural and livestock development, labor and tourism participate, as well as the food bank, as I mentioned it before, the private sector with Canaco Servitur, and the universities. This committee directs the operation and articulation of the projects and actions of the strategy through interdisciplinary work that guarantees the fulfillment of the establishment objectives. These objectives are 8, eradicate hunger in Nuevo León, promote intersectorial participation, position the strategy in society with the objective of adding new allies, consolidate the interinstitutional committee, feeding security and improvement of the nutritious conditions of the population, reduce the loss and food waste in the state, as well as to contribute to the generation of capacities to achieve feeding self-sufficiency. To promote an increase in donation, multiplying the impact and providing attention to a larger number of people. To fulfill these aspirations, the strategy currently has 10 technical committees, each one specialized in a particular dimension of the strategy. These committees design and execute specific actions for all of us to reach the established objectives. The first one, Innovation and Development Committee, for the correct usage of products and the reduction of lost waste. Feeding Services Committee was created for the reduction of waste through the implementation of quality and methodology oriented to achieve of good practices. Evaluation Committee for the monitoring of the strategy indicators. Institutional Strengthening Committee to strengthening the operation of feeding aid. Agriculture and Agri-Industries Committee for recovery of food in the first stages of the chain. Normativity for the legal frame of the operation of the strategy. Communication with the objective of positioning zero hunger. Nutritional intervention for the nutritious assistance of the population and feeding operation. Universities for the application of the strategy in the students community. Self-Services and Food Industry Committee that allows the wise use of donated food through self-service stores and supply centers. It is important to underline that with the will of all the sector together, this year we achieved 333 million pesos for the cost have been assured. This has been possible thanks to the support of the Food Bank, the government of the state, Grupo Financiero Banorte, and the donors in the private sector. These resources have been invested strategically in 13 projects. The advances reflect of the assistance of 86,000 people through transference and food packages. We have identified 800 productive projects with the objective of giving them integral support that helps the development of individual and collective capacities, recovering 215 tons of food. We have processed 37 tons of food and generate 46,000 products. We have given food orientation to more than 366 communities, and we have equipped warehouses in Caritas in Monterrey to store a larger amount of food. The third edition of the University Award of Social Innovation, where it was constructed with the universities. This university prize to social innovation has a prize up to 100 pesos as seed capital for the winners. We have assisted 139 full-time schools, which represents more than 7,000 kids and adolescents benefit through a daily meal. And we have launched a nutritional support strategy during the first 1,000 days of life. With the purpose of dimensioning the hunger problem in Nuevo León, we have been working with the loss and food waste estimation. The proof of this is a health and nutrition national survey with a specific evaluation of the first infancy, as well as communication and awareness campaign. Our efforts not only show these achievements to guarantee the transparency of the resources through the civil interinstitutional committee, we have obtained a trust fund of 50 million pesos. We have obtained this trust fund, and which is invested in the following areas: feeding aid, which allow us to have a greater attention reach and contribute to more people having access to food; blockchain in technology that can be applied to integrate a unique database that will make the reference of the strategy beneficiaries easier; a study of laws and food waste to know the magnitude of the problem and identify its main causes; the strengthening of the local markets and support of the field workers, as well as productive projects, being these last two necessary not just to attend the hunger problem, but also to eradicate it, developing capacities and opening the road to local producers so they can reach the feeding self-sufficiency. Today, in Zero Hunger, more than 1,800 volunteers and 14 institutions have participated and are committed to the battle against hunger in Nuevo León. Last October the 28th, we were able to sign an agreement to consolidate the unique database of beneficiaries of the Zero Hunger strategy, where the Secretariat of Equality and Inclusion, as well as DIP Nuevo León and the Food Bank of Caritas de Monterrey, join forces to avoid duplicity of support and maximize the impact. In October, the Zero Hunger month, we launched a permanent campaign. We held events, activities, and daily activations to contribute the awareness of the hunger problem. As part of the awareness campaign, we launched the Zero Hunger Nuevo León Passport, which aims to motivate the participation of all population with simple actions in a way that they can join the cause. Some activities pushed through this passport were donating Zero Hunger grocery shopping with a cause, vegetables growth at home, intelligent grocery shopping list, among others. We seek to integrate the certainty that in small actions, in daily activities, we can contribute to the reduction of food waste and feeding aid. The truth is that the response has been extraordinary by the society, the team that integrates the strategy. There is a great amount of volunteers willing to help and to provide society with their time and effort. This is an open campaign of participation in which every element adds up. And in Zero Hunger, we believe in that great opportunities to help others don't come frequently, but the small ones surround us every day. And today we are sure that we can transform this reality. The task is big, but what makes us unique as a strategy is that we believe in the power of collaboration and evaluation as a process to continuous improvement. All the allies have a great chance to make a difference. To eradicate hunger is possible if each one of us is part of the problem. We know that each one of us is part of the solution. Thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Jose Antonio. Thank you very much for this excellent presentation, and thanks to all three of you. Now, since we are now already fairly close, I mean, after these three presentations, let me take this opportunity to ask all three of you a common question and ask you to respond to this. Is that we've heard from variation amongst the three presentations is that essentially there are corporate interests which have their supply chains and the in terms of transportation or procurement, and then the outlets, the groceries, etc. And then on the other hand, you have local governments whose interests are to maintain food security, to maintain to make sure that services are delivered. And obviously, on top of all of this, you have the citizens' demands. I mean, you have to have people live in cities, and therefore the economy is affected. Now, since the city, the Resilient Cities Network is a network of practitioners. I mean, their question would be, what is the role of the city in how many different ways? How can it? Where do they have to pay attention to make sure that this whole system operates in a functional manner? So, Ik, we'll start with you, then we'll ask Mark, and then Jose Antonio, please.
But that's a really good question. So I think where the city should really start is, as Mark illustrated, they need to understand their food system. Most cities don't. It's just a mystery to them, and understand where the food comes from. And then I think it is kind of like developing a vision for where they want their food system to be. And that goes beyond saying we want to eradicate hunger and we want it to be sustainable and resilient, but more specific to their locality. And then next step for me would be to then understand what are the levers of influence. And quite often cities have the power of being the convener. So they can bring the different stakeholders together. And I think here is the source of the secret recipe. It is literally helping to bring the stakeholders together and start working towards a common goal. Quite often, the individuals, whether that's commercial, whether that's the supermarkets, whether that's the consumer, they don't understand the role they play in the overall system. But bringing them together, I think we can really make a difference.
Yeah, and from my point of view, I think that's exactly right. And understanding those systems is why we sort of started with the mapping effort. I think during what we would call blue sky days, when there's nothing bad happening, government has a very strong role to make sure that people have access to food. And I think that's where certainly we can have a lot of influence. I think what we've seen, though, is that in those times when something happens to disrupt that flow of food, that government sometimes tends to want to step in and think they can fix that. But we don't own and operate the system, so we can't fix that. Well, the best and really our ultimate goal is to make sure that flow of food gets restored. And the only way to do that, I believe, is, and what we've seen is by working with those private sector owners and operators that manage those systems, understand what their risk management processes are, understanding if there's a disruption, what they would need from government and what we would need from them. And that requires a lot of collaboration up front when bad things aren't happening. So really focusing on building that partnership with the private sector, I think, is key.
Jose Antonio?
According to what they have said, I think it's crucial the articulation and participation of all the actors involved in the supply chain of food. It is clear that the role of the government is the policy making to make real the diminution of food waste. And also I think there is an actor that we don't think so frequently, but I think the citizens as us, we have a great task to develop as the conscientization of the use of food, and also all the ways that we can use the food to reach others that don't have the opportunity to feed their families. I think all the sectors, as they said, are involved and have a crucial role in the food security and circular system of food. So I think we have to work together to coordinate. This is why we create a committee that all the sectors are involved.
Thank you. Lynette?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, really interested in the food waste issue. So my question to the panelists is, what role do you think policy making could play in incentivizing food waste prevention and circularity? I'm gonna, perhaps Aika, you can kick us off, and then Mark, and then Jose Antonio.
Yeah, so I think food waste prevention is a really important topic, and I think sometimes we talk about demand as being kind of an immutable, fixed thing, but demand can also be shaped by education, by engagement, and I think it ties back to the whole food system. I wouldn't treat it as an isolated system. So for instance, people who are more aware of seasonality, of how food's grown, and kind of engage more with the food system in form of urban gardens or so forth, it'll shape their behavior, and it'll also shape their waste behavior. So in wealthy cities, the issue is quite often that people buy more than they need, and then they discard it. In developing countries, quite often there isn't the infrastructure to make sure that the food gets to the consumers in one edible piece, and so there we have to look at other things. And I think that it's going to be a quite specific solution, but the first thing is to make sure that less goes to waste, and then we've got to make sure, because we will never eliminate it completely, the bits that do go to waste don't become waste. They become nutrient, and they become the fertilizer for the next bit of food we want to eat.
I think sometimes our bias in government is to think that when we're confronted with a problem, we can regulate it out, and I think there's a certain amount of policy improvements that can be made to incentivize and encourage sources of potential food waste. And I think in this case of a lot of the institutions that serve food, a lot of the grocery stores. But in my mind, the best incentive we can do is to make sure that we've got the infrastructure in place that enables that kind of food waste reduction to take place. And I think that's, for us, I think that's really where the challenge is right now, is to make sure that it's one thing to go out and encourage individual homeowners to don't throw your food waste in the trash because it's going to generate methane in the landfill. Put it in a composting bin and somebody will come and pick it up. Well, there's got to be somebody to come and pick it up, somebody to go do something with it, and then somebody to turn that product into something really useful. So I think I really liked Ike's sort of description of the role of government as a convener, that I think we can bring people together and talk about what needs to be done to do that. And then we can look at where government can add value without, imposing a regulatory regime on that.
As Mark mentioned, I think it's crucial the role of the government as a mechanism, or given the platform to integrate of the sectors. Also, the laws are important. We have examples such as France and other countries that have raised it to a public policy level, in addition to the right to food, the non-waste of food that go hand by hand for a circular food system. It is essential, as I mentioned, to work. It is a political level, but one condition without making it possible is the articulation and participation of all actors involved. I don't think there is other way by finding the solutions or the best practices with all the actors involved in the chain of supply of the food.
Thank you very much. Handing it back to you, Vaja.
Thank you. Now, there's a very interesting question that's come online from Kristen, and I'm going to read it. It's interesting. It says, thank you very much for the presentations, but Mark and even IK and even Jose Antonio might want to answer this, is that the interest is in knowing more about the efforts to grow the local food economy. For example, how are you doing this? And have you worked out how much local food economy can possibly contribute to the total food needs of the city, and how to ensure equitable access? Thanks.
Yeah, so I can say a couple of things there. So we're doing a couple of things at the moment. So and the answer is, it depends, of course, how much can it contribute, because it depends on what the city do. So you can build a high-tech agri-food hub, like places like Singapore are planning, and they want to produce in their high-tech agri-food hub 22% of the nutritional needs of the whole city. So, and that's a defined area. And the other way to do is you can do a softer touch, and this is what the City of Mexico is doing at the moment. They have a network, what they call the rhizoma of urban gardens, where basically local communities get involved in food growing, and they want to scale this up. And we're helping them at the moment identifying the possibilities. So using satellite imagery and working out, where are the possible sites, and also working out how can we make this an investable package, so there is funding flowing. And I guess, there'll be a lot of sort of soft touch possibilities each city has to encourage doing, more urban and peri-urban food growing, whether that's creating the market space so people can come and sell locally, and so forth and so forth. And the way I like to look at it is talking about food capacity. So it's increasing the capacity in a city to provide its own food. And the target is less about a specific percentage, that'll depend on case and case. It's more about, what's the best we can do with the means we have in our city to produce as much food and engage as many people as possible in it.
And I think for us, yeah, we don't have a good handle on what percentage currently is served by our local food economy and what percentage could be, because there just isn't good information about that. But we can make assumptions about that. I mean, I think one of the assumptions is there's still going to be a big reliance in an urban area like ours on the commercial grocery industry. But we also know from talking with each of our individual county planning commissions, understanding what available agricultural land is out there that is currently being worked, what land could be reworked into agricultural land, and putting programs in place to help encourage that. And I know the U.S. Department of Agriculture is really putting out a whole lot of money now to cities to try to figure out how they can do that better. And particularly for us, we have a lot of marginalized communities that historically have been left out of the agricultural business that have a lot of capacity. And we learned this during the pandemic when people were having trouble getting food from the grocery stores. We had a number of pop-up food hubs start in the city where local farmers were connecting with nonprofits. They were bringing their wares in and they were making the food available to people, and they were making a little bit of money on that. And so everybody sort of won on that. It's a very small scale though. And I think one of the things that we have to realize is that we need to do everything we can to sort of shorten that distance between supply and demand. But in the end, that probably is not going to be the solution to our food resilience system problem. It's an important part of it though.
I would agree with what they have said. In the case of Nuevo León in Mexico, we are working on the recovery and processing of food, as well as on productive projects to encourage the local economy. With the principal actors are poor people, extreme poor people. These projects are to encourage the local economy and provide added value to their products. And also we are working with the laborers to recover crops from small producers who don't have the enough amount of money to pay labor. And also all the things we are working are with the private sector. We are developing projects to make a sustainable way to make enterprises with the poor people that are capable to develop other kind of products that can go to the self-services stores, as we call it in Spanish, productos con causa, cost products that allow them to have improvement in the local economy and also make other people part of this project. So I think what we are doing are we need to do more also, as all have said, but we also are trying to articulate all the actors that I think it's principal to make a food circular system and improve the local economy.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you very much to all our wonderful speakers for taking the time today to share your thoughts and experiences with us. Unfortunately, we're out of time. But before we go, just really also wanted to thank everyone in the audience for your questions and for contributing to the discussions today. And apologies that we could not get to all of your questions. And just before we go as well, for those in the audience who are interested to share stories on what you're doing to strengthen food systems, including on food waste and circularity, please do reach out to us. Finally, this is also the last Cities on the Frontline session for 2022. We will certainly resume our webinar series on January 19th on resilience for communities, covering climate resilience and equity. More information will, of course, be shared via our mailing list and on LinkedIn. So thank you very much again to everyone. I'm wishing you a very good year-end break and see you next year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.